And what was it you were predicting me to play some filthy aggro deck?
I know you played well. I can see you playing something weird because I've seen you play too many times to know like you'll just put some on in.
Welcome everybody, it's Spessy here, and today I have my first ever video recorded using physical cards. As you can see me mulliganing in the Content Creator Set Champs. My first opponent is Raven, a very good friend of mine and a tough first round opponent. This was a 16-player tournament with 4 rounds of Swiss and a top 4 cut. The top 4 players all got their hands on Ursula Sea Witch Queen Enchanted, and the top 2 got a playmat, with the first place player getting a champion version of the playmat. The set championships, the store championships, do come up in the month of July here. And yeah, make sure you check them out. They're going to be every weekend in July. If you want to check your local game store, you can use the Disney Lorcana store locator. Raven here inked a Madam Mim Snake on turn 1 and played nothing. I inked Friends on the other side, and I open up with Maleficent. And Raven here, he literally predicted I would be playing some kind of filthy aggro deck. Well, not quite. Raven does know me quite well. He then inks a goat. So I still don't know what color combination Raven's playing exactly, and takes the Flynn Rider. So obviously at this moment I take a big sigh because I'm like, okay, Ruby Amethyst. Now, the Ruby Amethyst matchup is pretty tricky for me. It is a pretty even matchup as I quest for 2 with my Maleficent. And then I go ahead and ink a Magic Broom, and I come in with the Baboom. And you can start to see already why I like this color combination. The Maleficent just putting in some work, clearing the board with Baboom. Obviously, Flynn Rider, a pretty common threat. Baboom able to hit things like Diablo, as Raven inks that Sisu now and goes in with another Sisu. Now, instantly when I see this Sisu, I am thinking I want to try and trade it for a Madam Mim Fox. Sisu has this 4 willpower, which is pretty difficult for me to remove. And in the early game here, it's important I maintain control of the board. So I ink a tiny Tinkerbell Tactician. I quest for another 2 of Maleficent, putting me up to 4 already, which is a really, really quick start here. Especially when going second, right? You can see the value of the Maleficent. And here comes the Snake for 2, and then another one, and guess who's back? Maleficent biding her time. You can already see why this Maleficent is in the deck. Funnily enough, this was one of the late additions in the deck. I've been testing this deck for quite a few weeks, and it just felt a bit too slow, but this was the extra juice the deck needed. This is a key moment here. Raven plays a Snake into the Inkwell and puts a goat down to put 1 on the board, but really considers for a long time whether to quest with the Sisu. I've actually sped it up here. Does decide to quest with Sisu for 2, and I was really happy to see this because I have a Fox in my hand, or I'm about to draw a Fox, and this was kind of my game plan here to try and trade out the Sisu for a Fox. So the Maleficent quests again, as well as the Snake, putting me up to 7 already. So a quick start here, and I'm of course at 3 ink. I'm going to go ahead and potentially ink this turn, but to begin with, I spend 3, and in comes the signed Madam Mim Fox. The artist Alice Bastoni was at Lille. I was able to get it signed, and the signed Fox trades there. This is a big decision as well. I ink a Tinkerbell, and you're going to see my hand again in a moment. As you can see it here, I had a Smee, and a Rabbit. But I thought for a long time, I did speed it up in editing about what to ink, and I decided to go for the Tinkerbell, which a lot of people wouldn't have done. They would have just inked one of those Smees. The reason is because I've started pretty aggressively, is I just can see myself playing like a double Smee next turn, for example. Raven sings, Beaking Undisputed, a great card to sing with the goat, of course. I also thought for a while about keeping the Maleficent on the board, but I have no bounce cards left in hand, so it's kind of done its job, as then a Maleficent card draw comes through for Raven. So in this position, I'm starting to get a little bit nervous, but the great news is I've started very, very aggressively in terms of lore. So if I can just keep trying to maintain a little bit of board presence, and then I can start using those goats to cross the line. And that's why I really decided to ink the Tinkerbell. The Snake is going to quest. Of course, I could trade for the Merlin here, but I'm trying to be the aggressor here. I am feeling like I'm in a pretty good position, and I'm wanting to force Raven to make the trades. And here comes the play I decided to make in the previous turn when inking the Tinkerbell with the double Smees. And it's these ink decisions that are so important here. And another one here is that I decide not to ink. Even though I'm only at 4, I do play, of course, Tinkerbell in my deck, which goes to 6. I play Belle, which goes to 5. But at this point in time, I'm trying to wrap the game up pretty quickly, and a card in hand or a card in the inkwell is one less card in hand, right? The goat that I could have inked is a card which I value more than that one extra card in the inkwell at this moment in time. Raven sings friends with Maleficent, plays this Chernobog's followers down into the inkwell as well, and of course is going to want to start trying to remove my threats on the board, is going to be scared of the threats of goats, and in comes a Medusa. And here's me and Raven just having a bit of fun. Like I say, good friend of mine. He told me to pick the Smee. I said, you pick the Smee. And then I picked the other one because obviously it doesn't actually matter. Then this quest that I managed to do with the snake in the previous turn, as I mentioned, because I've been the aggressor in this game, Raven does decide to make that trade. So rather than me making that trade, I got one extra lore by forcing Raven to make it instead. I spend 4, go for the rabbit, and this is the stage in the game where I start to try and replenish my hand. In a Ruby Amethyst matchup, I want to be relatively aggressive to start off with, just get as much lore down on the board as possible, while maintaining some board presence. And then, it's at this moment in time, as I quest this Smee, that with the rabbits and things like that, I'm going to start to try and get more card draw. At one point in the game here, I do ink a card off camera. Obviously, this is my first time recording in person, so the production quality is just going to increase from this point on. I've already learned a lot from this, having watched all the games back. And again, Raven is the aggressor here. Now, this is not a trade I'm super happy about because this Madame Medusa is still on the board, and I don't have Tinkerbell in hand at this moment in time either. Of course, I did put one down in the inkwell. I do think I'm at 5 ink here. I think I put a Queen's Castle into the inkwell on the previous turn. It's just slightly off camera. Raven goes for a Queen's Castle, and this is obviously where things are starting to get quite scary for me. And this is a key decision. Raven goes for the Madame Mim onto the Maleficent, and I was really happy to see this actually. The Medusa back in hand was more of a threat for me than the card draw. But obviously Raven values the card draw, the inkable card in hand. Look, I tap my deck, I'm looking for the Tinkerbell, and oh my goodness, what a talented individual I am because I find it. I do have a Friends in hand, and so I was of course able to still sing Friends with the Merlin as well to try and get to that Tinkerbell. And also my decision to ink the Queen's Castle in the previous turn was really important here because it allowed me to get this Tink through. I think I was already thinking that, right? The Medusa was on the board the previous turn. I wasn't sure if I really wanted Medusa to trade for Smee and stay on the board, but if I find the Tinkerbell, I have a really smooth answer. And I ink the Baboom here. Merlin, of course, singing Friends, allowing me to ink a card which is not the goat, which I wanted to hold on to. And that Tinkerbell just coming through at the perfect time. This is a pretty good matchup for me, but it's not an amazing matchup by any stretch, particularly when going second. So I definitely got very lucky at this moment in time to find the Tink when I needed it. And of course, that decision to ink the Tink earlier was still quite good because I did get that double Smee down on the board. The Medusa was only able to remove one of my Smees, and another one therefore was able to get that little bit of extra questing power. Raven does play that Maleficent back down again, and he did definitely get punished by not bouncing the Medusa back to their hand with the fact that I had that Tinkerbell ready to clear the damaged Medusa. And Raven here goes for the Merlin Rabbit, obviously just continuing to draw cards. And at this point in the game, I have a really, really important decision to make very, very soon as the snake trades for the rabbit. You can see my hand here. I have a magic broom. I have a Tinkerbell, I think. But this is a really key decision. The castle is obviously a big threat. It's going to continue to gain lore. So a lot of players here are going to be super tempted to just challenge the Queen's Castle with the Tinkerbell, but I make a different decision. With the extra questing power that I had in the early game, I feel like I'm just about able to race this castle and ignore it. There's a few options for Queen's Castle, right? You can challenge it. You can try and remove the cards which are placed into Queen's Castle to deny the card draw, or my personal favorite line is, and it doesn't always work, you have to pick your moments, just ignore it. And that's what I decide to do at this moment in time. I just decide to ignore it. I go for the goat, which puts me to 11. And of course, slamming into the castle with Tinkerbell is still going to leave it with 3 damage counters. So instead, I decide to quest with Tinkerbell and get to 13. So this is a really key decision in the game. Queen's Castle, as strong as it is, obviously it's not applying any board presence immediately. It is racking up lore for Raven, but I am the aggressor at this moment in time, despite going second. And this was really what the Maleficent on turn 1 with the bounce cards enabled me to do. It just allowed me to be the aggressor, force Raven to make some suboptimal trades. Like, look at this, the Maleficent being slammed into the Tinkerbell. I was so happy to see this. I think at this moment in time, there was the potential of Be Prepared as well, which was something I was quite scared about. But I just decided to make a calculated risk not to respect that, as also the Fox comes through and clears out the Tinkerbell. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that value of Tinkerbell questing for 2. Remove the Medusa. Also, that 1 damage on the snake meant that the snake was removed by the rabbit. So this 1 damage the Tinkerbell put down when it came in was huge. But then also requiring 2 threats from Raven. I have to say I got very lucky this game. Raven with no Maui, no Be Prepared there. This is a pretty tricky matchup overall. When going second, it's a tight one. But I did definitely draw pretty well indeed. Raven inks a brawl as well, and is then going to move the rabbit into Queen's Castle. And play's going to pass back on over to me. I'm 7 lore away. And of course, with that goat on the board, I'm going to be hoping to bounce it. There's a Benger, there's a magic broom. My editing's gone a bit pear-shaped. Pause. There we go. Benger and magic broom in hand, and another goat. And Raven's not happy to see that, because I get to 14. I decide to ink the broom here and play the Benger. Now, this is a risk, because I'm playing very, very heavily into Be Prepared here. However, I had the read in the previous turn that he doesn't have Be Prepared, because I think he would have gone for the Be Prepared instead of this suboptimal trade. And my best chance of him not having Be Prepared is this turn, right? If I delay, increases the odds of him finding Be Prepared. So I make a calculated risk here and hope that he doesn't have Be Prepared. Obviously, that extra card draw off of the Queen's Castle gives him some extra chances, and he does have 4 Be Prepares in his deck. Most players with 3. So I definitely got pretty fortunate that he didn't have it, but it was a calculated risk. And with the Medusa going through on Benger and my goat still on the board, I'm starting to get very, very close to that 20 lore mark. But of course, this Queen's Castle continuing to rack up the lore. I made the decision not to challenge into it with Tinkerbell, and therefore at this stage in the game, I just have to keep rushing. Does decide to ink the Maui in order to play the Maleficent. Not too unhappy to see Maui going into the Inkwell, because of course it's a rush card. But then the rabbit, able to sing Be King Undisputed, gets rid of a goat, which does put me up to 16, but of course does deny one of my questing threats for the next turn. It's going to be shortly my turn. Raven with a couple cards in hand. I don't know if I've got... I think I've got 1 card in hand, which you can see to the left there. Again, I'm going to get better with my camera setup and stuff. Still learning very much on the job. Let's see what I've got. What is going on, editing? Editing, man, what are you doing? Editing, man, what are you doing? I quest here, getting up to 17. I have 6 to spend with a Tinkerbell, which, while that's good here, it's not great, to be honest. I'd much rather something which is... I'd rather go wide at this stage in the game, but with only 2 cards in hand, the Tinkerbell's a pretty nice option to have. And I do make another calculated risk to play further into Be Prepared and play this 1-cost magic broom. What I could have done is I could have played the broom before Tinkerbell to just take a card draw off of it and try and find something better for the next turn. I could have also held on to it. Probably the best bet would have either been to make the play I did, which is play further into Be Prepared. This is also helping me play around Tremaine, Be King Undisputed, by being able to sacrifice the magic broom and keep the Tinkerbell on the board. That's the decision I went for. I think the other line was to play the broom and then the Tink and just draw with it. But I think this was a good decision. Rabbit slams into the goat. This is because Raven at this moment in time is trying to dig for that removal, which is a very good sign for me because they've managed to miss it. And again, I got pretty fortunate here. Raven giving me a really, really tough run. Definitely a solid player. One of the tougher players really to queue into in the first round, I would say. Goes for Maleficent, and this is me just really hoping that there's no Be King Undisputed, but I've done a pretty good job of playing around that at this point in time. A lot of that ink already having been spent. He got very unlucky here not to find a Be Prepared or something like that. Maleficent slams into Goat. Of course, Goat puts me up to 18. So this Tinkerbell has to be removed from the board. Otherwise, I am going to be crossing the finish line. And this is where that decision to play the Magic Broom was pretty important for me. I can't see Raven's hand perfectly, but if there's like a Bee King Undisputed in there, then I'm feeling very, very happy, or a Tremaine that he's able to play. I'm feeling very happy that that is not a possibility. As the Rabbit comes back through, he's still digging. Doesn't have the answers necessary to deal with this Tinkerbell, and that is going to allow me to finish the game crossing the line. But look how tight it was. The Maleficent, the absolute star of the show, that extra questing early on just allowed me to be the aggressor despite going second, and that was just so important. It just allowed me to ignore this Queen's Castle. Okay, now in game number 2, you can see my opening hand vaguely here. I know I'm going second. I know what I'm up against. These are the cards I get rid of. Queen's Castle, obviously not very good going second. The Benja's not great. The Zeus I get rid of being an uninkable. It's like a nice top deck. And I also get rid of one Smee. And I believe that's because there is a second Smee in my hand, or there's a turn 2 play, which I have in mind. Definitely going to get better at like making sure I'm showing everything to the camera as I move with this production. And great news for me, because turn 1, Raven has nothing to play. And he's very nervous here about a turn 1 Maleficent for me. However, so unfortunately for me, fortunately for Raven, not an option. And he's very happy to see that, I think, because his hand is not looking great. I don't think he has a 2-drop either. And this Maleficent on turn 1, even when going second, would have just been so devastating. So I am playing 11 1-drops. Maybe after this, I might even consider putting that 4th Maleficent in, because there was a couple games this tournament where I missed that turn 1 play and it felt so bad. The good news for me is I do have the Mr. Smee available on 2 here, because of course the Baboom and Snake, while 2-cost cards, are not cards that I'm able to play in this position. So the Mr. Smee does come down. Of course I did mulligan one of those away as well. I think I kept a Friends and a Smee from my opening hand, and the decision to keep Friends is just in this matchup. Often the games can go on for a long time, and it can definitely be a battle of the card draw tools. Raven comes in with Maleficent. Not really a card I'm too scared of, but of course with Smee damaging itself by 1, this does give Raven an okay trade onto Mr. Smee, a way of shutting down my card draw, my questing power. And I've got a pretty awkward hand here. I'm at 3 ink, or I'm going to be able to go to 3 ink, but there's not too much I want to do. Of course, I could go for some bounce stuff. A lot of you are just going to be like saying, why not play the Tiny Tink Tactician? But like Tinkerbell Shift isn't really providing me much value here. I do decide to go for it. And the main reason for this is that I have Friends in hand, and I can sing Friends. It could also potentially change the way that Raven plays with the threat of that Tinkerbell Shift. But what I kind of discovered the more I played, and even in the tournament, I definitely feel like I improved as the tournament went on, was this Tinkerbell on turn 3 is just such a solid option to sing Friends and provide a lot of threat. Against Raven's board here in particular, it's not providing that much threat, but it's still just an okay card to play. If I'm just going to sing Friends the next turn, it's just got a solid stat line, 2-4. Pretty difficult to deal with for a 3-cost card, and it just always has that threat. So Raven, of course, decides to remove the Smee, which makes a lot of sense. The Smee's questing for 2 and has that Rabbit down on the board. My Tiny Tink is going to sing Friends on the other side. That's not too bad, is it? Still a threat as well that he might want to consider trying to remove because of the shift threat. I've got a couple Babooms. I've got a Chernobogs. I've got a Fox in there as well as Tink. Shifting Tink, while it might be tempting, does not provide me with much value here because, I mean, I wanted to sing Friends this turn anyway, and there's not really anything to remove from the board. So instead, I decide to play a Chernobogs for 1, an Ink, a Baboom, and then I just decide to bounce this Chernobogs back into my hand with a Fox. Basically, the Fox just being some board presence here. So not exactly the most amazing play. But of course, Raven here also with a pretty slow start, skipping turn 1 and turn 2. So I definitely got a little bit fortunate here that I was able to still have some board presence, because this is not a start I'm looking for. Very, very slow overall. Not much questing power at all. And that Mr. Smee, of course, being removed. Now, pretty scary hand here for Raven, because he has Bee King Undisputed, which can be sung by Merlin, and then has that Tremaine as well. I do think Bee King Undisputed and Tremaine is just such a solid option here in a Ruby Amethyst deck, because they pair together so well. They provide value with each other. And there is the Rabbit singing Bee King Undisputed. Bit of a decision for me to make. I do decide, Obviously, the Tinkerbell, I could shift, so that's providing a threat. But with Raven being at 5 ink this turn, potentially, there's a threat of Maui removing my Tinkerbell this turn anyway. So I decided to keep the Fox, which is readied. And in comes the Queen's Castle, which is not exactly the most threatening play here because I have a Fox on the board. Does, of course, move the Rabbit into the castle. And I've got a bit of a decision this turn in terms of whether I start damaging the castle or if I remove the Rabbit. And in this matchup, the Rabbit is very, very valuable for Raven. He's able to bounce it back multiple times. Of course, I want to remove the castle as quickly as possible, but the Rabbit is exerted this turn. It might not be the next turn, he might quest with it and then bounce it back and replay it. So I made the decision to remove the Rabbit. The 2 damage counters on my Fox mean very little at this moment in time. It's not like I'm playing against Steel where there's the threat of grab your swords or let the Storm Rage on or a Tinkerbell. And I also have the option of bouncing this this Fox back into my hand at a later stage. So I definitely think this was the right decision to remove the Rabbit. Of course, that also denies his ability to be able to sing something like... I pay 1 for Churnabox, I get there eventually, and then I'm going to pay 3 for another Fox, bouncing the Churnabox back. This is the other nice thing about just having a lot of 1-drops. I'm at 11, just consistently having that ability to just play a card to just bounce it back instantly, and then I do also replay the Churnabox followers here. So Queen's Castle, of course, going to get Raven a couple of lore, but I'm at a pretty nice position here, and again, he did miss the Maui, which I'm definitely quite happy about, but this 2 damage on the Fox is not something I'm bothered about at all, really, because if he does come through with a Maui, it's going to leave Maui at 4 damage, which of course is just a Tinkerbell away from being removed. So pretty happy with my decision to have just gotten rid of that Rabbit, let the castle gain that 2 lore, and then I'm able to clean it up pretty easily. The following turn, that is at least my plan. Raven going to ink Churnabox followers. Is going to be at 6 ink now, I do believe. So still not quite at that B prep turn. You can see I'm at 3 cards in hand. There's another Rabbit comes through for Raven. And I'm at 3 cards in hand. But only at 2 lore at this stage in the game is not where I want to be. I want to be at like 8, 9, 10 at this stage. So really I have to kind of change my game plan. Compared to the previous game, I could go a lot more aggressive because I had that early start. Whereas here, I definitely need board control and I need to try and kind of outvalue Raven in terms of cards in hand. But obviously at this moment in time, Raven with an abundance of cards in hand. The good news for me is I do have board control. But of course, Raven now at 6 ink, I have to really start thinking about playing around. Be prepared. So I use the Fox with the damage counters to clean up that Queen's Castle. And now that Rabbit, of course, raided on the board I can't deal with, but I do have the Churnabogs I could draw with. I have the Fox I could either quest, or if I have friends available, I can sing that, of course, which I go ahead and do. And this also comes back to my mulligan. I kept a copy of Friends on the other side in my mulligan. Not something I would necessarily do in a lot of matchups, but knowing I was against Ruby Amethyst, I know the value potentially of that. The Churnabogs then comes through, and I do decide to draw with it. You could argue I should have done this before I removed the Queen's Castle because it could just, change my decision making. Obviously, I don't think it mattered at all here, but just would have been good practice to do the card draw before the challenging. In comes the Rabbit, and this is where my card draw engines start to come through. The Frenzy on the other side, that being able to sing with Tink and with the Fox, allowing me to draw into cards like Rabbit and start really trying to change my game plan from the previous game instead of that aggressive approach. The other nice thing about the Rabbit here is it is mitigating the value slightly of a Be Prepared. And Raven makes a misplay here by just not questing with the Rabbit before playing the Be Prepared. He snapped that Be Prepared a little bit too soon. We've all done it. Of course, Raven should have just quested here. It was a free quest for 1 with Rabbit. But the nice thing for me here is now that the B Prep comes through, I can start to be the aggressor on the board as I'm, the board's been reset and I'm now going first in many ways, right? So I go for a Queen's Castle and a Mr. Smee. 6 ink spent, but a lot of questing power put down on the board. And of course, at this stage in the game, the Queen's Castle is very, very good because a Maui on its own is not able to remove the Queen's Castle. So you really have to pick your moments of Queen's Castle, and after a board reset like that is a really good time to go for it. Raven spending 2 at this moment to play a Flynn Rider Frenemy. Of course, this is a card which can start racking up the lore for him pretty quickly, gaining 3 lore if he has the highest strength card on the board. Medusa removes Smee, and my Queen's Castle is starting to rack up its lore, putting me up to 5. And at this moment in time, obviously I want to try and deny the Flynn Rider value, but I also want to try and protect my Queen's Castle as much as possible, but also develop a threat overload. If Raven is able to remove my Queen's Castle this turn, I still want some cards down on the board which are able to help me out with some questing. So maybe a second Queen's Castle could be an option, but if I go for that, I'm going to start losing a lot of board presence. Not exactly certain what's in my hand because I'm not doing a very good job of showing it. Again, I'm going to make sure I get better at this. Good learning experience for me, recording in person. But the rabbit comes back down, and then a Maleficent 1-drop. That's what I'm saying about this card. It's just a really nice card at different moments in the game. This is helping me play around something like a Tremaine, because I could just sacrifice the Maleficent instead of the rabbit in the Queen's Castle now. And it's just starting to threaten some questing power, which I so desperately need at this stage in the game. Much better than a Pascal. Pascal could be inked, but I'm very happy to be playing this Maleficent down on the board for just 1-2 questing power. But the Flynn Rider does gain 3 lore here for Raven, with that 4 strength on Medusa being more than the 2 strength of my highest character, which is, of course, that 2 strength Rabbit. In comes Maui, and I'm pretty nervous at this stage in the game. It's not looking good. Maui putting in 6 damage to the castle. And I'm just kind of expecting Raven to finish it off with something else. Goes for the Medusa, not wanting to exert the Flynn Rider because it could be removed potentially. But this is where the value of my rabbit is going to come in very soon. And Raven this time does go for the snake onto the Medusa instead this time. And of course, this 6 strength of Maui is very, very threatening for the Flynn Rider. So I did get some value off of the Queen's Castle, but Raven's done a great job of resetting. But here is the value of the rabbit. Look at this. I get to sing Zeus, and do you see what's cut? Well, that just cleans up the Maui. I was thinking in my head I was about to clear it with Tinkerbell, but no, it just cleans it in one swoop. And that is so much tempo because I've spent 0 ink to do that, so I still have all my ink available. I just basically, instead of questing for 1 with my rabbit, I was able to do that. And of course, the rabbit has replenished my hand. The friends on the other side has replenished my hand. So playing a card like Zeus from hand in many decks is just too expensive for my taste because it's just 1 less card you have in hand. But with the Amethyst card draw, that is just so much value, and it's just a huge moment in this game for me. If I wasn't able to do that, this castle can't come down. But look at Raven. He's not happy to see another one because that Maui is now gone, and there's another castle which I could potentially move some cards into to start getting some more card draw as well. Now, I have a decision on whether I quest with Maleficent as well. At this stage in the game, I have a bit of a threat overload because my rabbit is a threat, my castle's a threat. So I think at this stage, it probably just makes sense to put my Maleficent down on the board, quest with my Maleficent as well, because if Raven decides to remove my Maleficent, that means that he's got less options to deal with my Queen's Castle and less options to deal with my rabbit as well. So I pay 2 for the Mr. Smee. I do decide to quest. I thought about it, and I'm not able to move anything into the Queen's Castle here. I decided to spend 2 ink on the Smee rather than spending to put cards into the castle because they're both exerted, and the Smee at this stage in the game, I need to go wide. I need to get as many questing threats down on the board as possible. And yeah, we see the Madam Mim removing the Maleficent. This could have been 3 damage into the castle. This could have been 3 damage into the rabbit. There, Medusa comes through and does clean up the Smee instead of the rabbit. But again, I went wide here with my threats. The castle's still there. It's still got full health. The Smee got removed. The Maleficent got removed by Medusa, but I still have this Merlin rabbit down on the board with another Zeus ready to sing for some more tempo. And in comes Sisu, and Raven absolutely dominating the board at this stage. It is not looking good, but the Queen's Castle continues to rack up the lore, putting me up to 9. My rabbit, of course, still ready and waiting. I can sing Zeus, which should clean up the Sisu potentially. Of course, that Flynn Rider's also a bit of a threat with the Madame Medusa having 4 strength. Sisu also having a lot of strength because I do still have quite a few cards in my hand. So the Zeus, I have a decision here whether I remove Sisu or Medusa. Sisu is obviously the bigger questing threat. I can dump my hand a little bit potentially, currently with 3 cards in hand. And the Medusa is also a threat to be bounced back repeatedly. So I decided to remove the Medusa for that reason. And I think it was a good decision because I didn't spend any of my ink this turn either. So I still have a lot of ink to potentially dump my hand to mitigate the value of that Sisu. So then if I can just get a 3 strength or more card down on the board, that is going to deny the Flynn Rider for this turn. And I do spend 6 on Tinkerbell at this moment in time, which is kind of stopping Raven from wanting to quest next turn. It's not exactly amazing at this stage in the game, but also potentially a good option to move into castle. So I do ink that Chernobog. It's just off camera again. I'm going to get better at making sure I've got everything in shot. And then the Tinkerbell goes into Queen's Castle. So that's the nice thing about the Tink, really, is that it was a expensive card, which is applying some pressure next turn, but it's also just a difficult card for Raven to deal with being in the castle. It can't be Medusa'd, but of course there is the threat of Raven removing the rabbit and then using Tremaine or using Bee King Undisputed. But I do draw a Maleficent off the top, which puts me to 2 cards in hand, which I was trying to display nicely on camera, but it's off shot. But there comes the Tremaine, and it's just going so well for Raven. It does not look good. You can see he's a very good player. He knows what he's doing, okay? There was that slight misplay on the rabbit, but it happens to the best of us. The Queen's Castle sinks in, or takes 3 damage from the Sisu. But Raven, again, deciding to keep that Flynn Rider on the board, readied, definitely not wanting to give me a way of rushing and removing it. I think he might have honestly been a little bit better just dealing damage at this stage in the game into the castle, but deciding to hold on to the Flynn and ready it. In comes another goat. This is what I'm looking to do, right? Get close to 20 and then just cheese my way with goats to the win. So that's 4 of my lore spent. And then in comes the money card of this matchup, the Maleficent. Again, then I just spend another 2 ink to put the Maleficent down into the Queen's Castle. And I try and dump my hand to try and remove as much value from that Sisu as possible. I think I'm at 1 card in hand at this stage. I think it might be another goat, actually. I have a feeling it's another goat, which there's definitely worse cards to have available at this time. And yeah, Raven has not done much questing power because, again, he's been forced to just continue to trade into my threats and remove my threats. I was able to get a lot of board control back by singing Zeus with rabbits, while also gaining a lot of card draw. The Tremaine and the Flynn are going to challenge into the castle. And this is kind of what I mean about his decision not to challenge with the Flynn in the previous turn. If he had challenged with the Flynn in the previous turn, he would have been able to quest for 2 with this Tremaine instead of challenging with it this turn. Quest with Sisu puts him up to 7. I'm now chilling at 12 as I get a magic broom into my hand alongside, I think it's a goat. So I'm at 2 cards in hand. Obviously, I'm just going to, at this point, I've got the options to maybe challenge with the goat, remove some stuff, but I just decide it's now or never. I get up to 15. I'm starting to get very, very close. This Maleficent absolutely makes the difference. Currently playing 3. Definitely could see an argument to play 4. I did play 4 quite a bit in testing. In comes another go, and look at that from Raven, the shake of the head. He did not want to see that. Putting me up to 16. And I do decide to kind of go for broke at this moment in time. I've got a pretty good read that there's no Be Prepared available, because I feel like it would have come through sooner. He did make some kind of suboptimal trades and stuff like that. Quests with everything. But I do think I misplayed pretty heavily, actually, at this time. I played way too heavily into Be Prepared. And it does come through. I don't even know if I did have a read that there was no Be Prepared. I actually, after this, I spoke with Raven quite a bit. Obviously, I get up to 18 because of the Be Prepared. I was saying to Raven, I was like, mate, I'm pretty sure I misplayed. I think I was really supposed to hold this broom, but oh my goodness, what a top deck. This is so filthy, what you're about to see. I have 7 ink. I top deck a Friends, which allows me to pay 4 for the Chernobyls and the Benja. And this is why I love Benja so much. Okay, no items in Raven's deck, but it's still applying a whole bunch of pressure. I definitely think I misplayed with this broom, though. I should have held it. I played too heavily into that Be Prepared when I just didn't need to. And I'm now very much in top deck mode. And look at Raven's hand. It is absolutely ridiculous. Chernobog's going to quest. Of course, it's going to draw as well. Not certain what that was that's drawn, but look, I know it was coming before it even hits 1. I see him examining 7. Again, I could have maybe tried to play around that Be Prepared a little bit more, but trying to play around Tremaine and Be King Undisputed a bit as well, I think it was a good decision. If it was a Be King Undisputed or a Tremaine, my Benja would have got me across the line. Oh my goodness. Baker is so loud, mate. Like, the microphone barely picks me up, but you certainly heard him absolutely screaming Be Prepared off the top of his lungs. You gotta respect it. Merlin Goat comes in from Raven and puts him up to 14. And I'm still in top deck mode. Obviously, a Tinkerbell off the top pair gets me the win. A Goat gets me the win. A Spellbook gets me the win. But it is neither of those things. It is another Benja. Not the worst. Again, puts me up to 19 at this stage. Very much in top deck mode. And again, I do think I made a misplay with this Magic Broom a few turns ago, just playing too heavily into the Be Prepared. Goat puts Raven up to 15 now. And unsurprisingly, it's another Be Prepared. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I didn't see a single one in game one. And suddenly, seems like all he's got is Be Prepared. So I'm at 19. I'm still in top deck mode. A Goat gets me there. A Spellbook gets me there. There is only one Spellbook in the deck. And it's a Magic Broom. I just slam it down on the board. So all I need is that one lore. But now look at that. The Tremaine off the top. He's feeling pretty happy. He's feeling pretty good. And the Tremaine comes through and I'm gutted. And Ben here from Ravensburger, big shout out to Goat. He's like, go. It's a Tinkerbell. Not the worst. Not the best, because all it takes is another Tremaine, another Be King, maybe a bounce onto the Tremaine as well. But Raven doesn't currently have it. And again, this is where kind of those decisions not to take that one quest with the Rabbit earlier on mattered, because he's only at 16. It could have been 16. There was a time he could have quested with Flynn or challenged my castle and got a couple extra lore from Tremaine. Didn't quite have what he needed, and I was able to take this one down just about. GG's to Raven. Welcome everyone, it's Spetty here, and today we have the first video of this brand new Amethyst Steel deck I've been working on. It's $150. It was actually $100, but Queen's Castle has been shooting up in price. I had a flawless victory at the latest Content Creator Set Championships. I got second in the Rockstar Stitch one, and I was able to get first in this one, which I was very relieved about. I did feel like the favorite going into the tournament, and this deck absolutely popped off. It was 4 rounds of Swiss and then a top 4 cut. I went 6-0 with a total game record of 12 wins and 0 losses. Undefeated throughout the weekend with this deck. Going to also take this opportunity to quickly mention the Lorcana Fest, which is happening in the UK in Milton Keynes on the 13th and 14th of July, which includes a Super Store Championships on the 14th of July. I'm going to be there, so don't miss out. You can see the link in the description if you want to come and head out. It's going to be the biggest event that's really happened in the UK, and so I really did want to mention this to you. Look, that's me. Oh my goodness. So before we get into the first round game, let's take a quick look at the deck. As you see, about $150. It is a Amethyst Steel deck. The big reason I really wanted to play Steel was because of a couple of cards. Benja is a big one. I think Benja at the moment in this metagame is very, very strong against the Sapphire decks. Ruby Sapphire is very difficult for aggro decks to deal with, but if you can shut down their Fishbone Quill with Benja, not only are you getting some aggressive questing power, but you're really significantly disrupting their ability to play Be Prepared and Sisu as early as they might like to clear your board. And then of course the other big card that Steel has on offer, which is very good in this current metagame, is Baboom, a card which many of you know I've always been a big fan of. This is probably the most efficient answer to Diablo in the game, and even if you're not hitting Diablo with Baboom, it's just a really good card. So this is a big reason I've been wanting to play Steel for quite a long time. I tried quite a few different color combination pairings, but Amethyst is what I settled on. I think the bounce package is still just very, very strong. In particular, Merlin Goat helps you get across the line against those Ruby Sapphire decks as well. Often, if you lose the board against Ruby Sapphire, they can just remove every threat you play. So having the ability to get to 16 or 17 lore and still threaten to win with Goats is really good for a slightly more aggressive deck when going second. But this deck, what I love about it is it's just so flexible. Against the Ruby Sapphire decks, you can go very aggressive with cards like Maleficent biding her time, but then against decks like Ruby and Amethyst, you can really try and play their own game with lots of card draw tools, with things like the Merlin Rabbit, with friends on the other side, as well as all of your control tools. So the biggest thing that a lot of you are going to be surprised about is there's a few different tech options here. I mean, starting off with the 1-drops, we've got Chernobog's Followers and Magic Broom. These are cards I just love because they quest for 1 and then you can draw with them when the moment feels right. These are very good against Bucky decks because you can empty your hand and then on your turn take the card draw, which of course helps disrupt the discard. But it's also really good options against the Sapphire Steel decks, for example, because you can get some early questing down on the board, which then, rather than just sacrificing a bunch of board presence to something like a Grab Your Swords or a Tinkerbell, before that Tinkerbell or Grab Your Swords can come through, that's when you decide to draw with those cards. So in many ways, I almost compare these cards to goats because they're getting free lore while then replacing themselves, thinning your deck, increasing the consistency, increasing the odds of you finding those cards you're looking for, like those Merlin goats. They're just cards I'm very, very big fans of. Now, the final 1-drop is going to catch a lot of people's eyes. I was playing with Pascal, and I was playing 4 Pascals. I've tried 4 Maleficents as well. But what I found in my testing was the deck just felt a little bit too slow with Pascal, and I was thinking maybe I want to play a Merfolk deck. And then I thought, what about the purple Merfolk, Maleficent biding her time? I settled on playing 3 copies of Maleficent. I was playing 4. A lot of people might say, why not just play 2? But 3 felt like a really nice number. It's quite an aggressive stance. 11 1-drops. A lot of people say kind of 10 1-drops is the magic number. Well, I'm starting a new camp that says 11 1-drops is the magic number. You really, really want to have a turn 1 with this deck. And what Maleficent biding her time does is it just gives you so much more aggression. Against Ruby Sapphire, you are able to completely aggro them out of the game when going first. And then when going second, you have the great line of playing Maleficent on turn 1, questing for 2, and then bouncing it back into your hand with Madam Mim Snake. And as you're going to see in our game in a minute, this Maleficent can then be a great threat later on around turn 4 or 5. If you just have that 1 spare ink, you can put a card down for 1 ink, which is questing for 2, which is just so powerful. Of course, Mr. Smee, absolutely no captain synergy in this one, but just an amazing card, questing for 2 and being able to trade for things like Madam Mim Fox. It demands an answer a lot of the time. It's just a really, really good card. The other card which is going to catch a lot of your eyes is the Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician, a card which has been really, really slept on. Now, on first glance, this card looks pretty bad. Of course, unsurprisingly, the main reason for this card is to allow us to shift in the Giant Tinkerbell on turn number 4. This means that we can clear things like Bucky on turn 4, which is really, really important for this deck. Also, it just applies a lot of pressure against other decks, being able to clear multiple threats at once with your Giant Tinkerbell Fairy. However, what I discovered the more I played this card is the more I was impressed with it. Even if you don't have the Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, the Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician on turn 3 is giving your opponent a lot to think about because of this threat of the Shift Tink. And what often might happen is you put the Tiny Tinkerbell down and your opponent just decides to stop questing because they really have to respect your Tinkerbell Giant Fairy being able to remove multiple threats at once. And it also just allows you to play the Giant Fairy without getting to 6 ink. Often with this deck, you'd want to stay at like 4 or 5 ink. You can take a more aggressive game plan, particularly when going first. So having a way to get this Tinkerbell down on the board without forcing yourself to get to 6 ink in the inkwell is really great. The other thing about Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician is that she is just a really good option to sing friends on the other side. You put her down on turn 3, your opponent is quite worried about her and therefore doesn't quest, and then instead of shifting that Tinkerbell in, you might just want to play a Merlin Rabbit and sing friends on the other side with Tinkerbell, and that is just a really powerful option this deck has. And I think it's a card which has been underestimated for a long time, but with Bucky being such a menace and very, very difficult to clear, it just gives you such a fantastic option. The other very spicy card I included is 2 copies of Belle Accomplished Mystic. This is the most replaceable card in the deck, and I think that, for example, you could consider playing Smash instead of Belle. But what I really like about Belle is that she is unorthodox. You guys know me, I love a little bit of spice. So I caught a lot of my opponents off guard with her, which got me a lot more value. But she's also just providing a big threat on turn 5 if you have a Mr. Smee in particular. Mr. Smee has no way of being healed. It has no captains in this deck. So You play it on turn 2, you quest with it twice, and then the turn that you can play Bell, it's going to have 2 damage counters on. If your Smee's still on the board, you obviously want to quest with it again, but you also don't want it to just banish itself, and that is where Bell just comes in to provide tremendous value. Being able to move those 2 damage counters from Mr. Smee onto an opponent's Diablo, for example, is the ultimate combo with this card. But then, even when she hits the board, she has 4/4 stat line, so she can't be removed by Medusa. She quests for 2. She's just really solid. She also can be bounced. And yeah, you can even move damage counters from your opponent's cards to other cards as well. 4 copies of Thorens, 3 copies of Zeus. I almost played 4 copies of Zeus and 3 copies of Benja, but I decided the extra questing power might be a little bit better. Obviously, Zeus in this deck is great because you're able to sing it with cards like Rabbit and Goat, which you already want down on the board. When you played Rabbit, a lot of the time it's quite slow, but being able to sing Zeus with Rabbit just provides you with so much extra tempo. 1 copy of Spellbook. This card's great in particular against Ruby Amethyst as well as Ruby Sapphire once you lose the board. And finally, 4 copies of Queen's Castle, which is just an absolute menace of a card. In the first game you're about to see here, I played against my good friend and very good player Raven, who I've known for a long time from some other card games, and he was playing Lucas Serrano's deck, which won the 10K recently. It's a Ruby Amethyst deck, pretty low on 1-drops with only Chernobog's followers, but high on the top end with 4 B-Preps and 2 Tremaines, also 3 copies of Maleficent Sorceress. My version of Ruby Amethyst would probably look pretty similar, but I would definitely drop this Maleficent Sorceress in favor of Magic Brooms. I think early curve in this meta is very, very nice. But obviously this deck did very well for Luca, and Raven is a very tough first round opponent. So let's get into the games and see how I managed to maneuver my way through this matchup.